Welcome back and good morning to our media panel, listener columnist Bill Ralston and Radio New Zealand producer Susan Baldacci. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Let's begin, shall we, with, I think someone said to me on Twitter this week, the Royal Rump, Prince Harry. An extraordinary scenario where the Press Complaints Commission in the UK contacted the newspapers and said, don't publish these images. I guess that's all off the back, you would think, of the Leveson inquiry, Bill.
Oh, well, yeah, it is. The lunatic thing is, of course, it was all over the internet. And you go immediately to TMZ and there it is sitting there. And in fact, I think the paper's made that point. You know, pictures you've already seen on the internet.
Gosh, and isn't that an awful image? I'm not quite sure what that star covers on Prince Harry, but there you go. Yeah, we were broadcasting it here, but not in Britain. Quite extraordinary, wasn't it?
He's made an ass of himself.
Yes, you know, but you've got to know that the Sun headline writers were just dying to come up with a headline for this one. I think it's very rich of them.
And there they did.
Yeah, and there they did. It's very rich of them to suggest that they're doing this in the public interest at all. And, you know, they claim that they had this big conversation. Do we do it? Don't we do it? We're trying to protect your freedom of speech. I wish they would have these kinds of conversations about photos they put on their paper of parents who've lost their children into a murder or have gone missing or whatever. You know, I just find it very, very, they're not living in the real world.
I think that they were trying to justify it by saying that, you know, in essence, Prince Harry represents the monarchy, represents the Queen, so that's why there was a public interest. Well,
he is the royal family's bad boy. And as Boris Johnson was quoted in the yesterday's Daily Mail, he said, you can't, if he'd gone to Las Vegas and not misbehaved, that would have been a scandal, because what happens in Vegas usually stays in Vegas, but in this case, the mobile phone and the ability to take photos has ended up in a complete and utter mock scandal.
It is extraordinary, I think, though, that Prince Harry would think he could be at a party, and I've no idea why they would all suddenly decide to be nude, but as you say, it is Vegas, and think that someone might not think about taking a photo.
I mean, he's got bodyguards there. Why does nobody ever say, who was the person who sold those photos? What responsibility does that person have, rather than blame the Sun for printing them when everyone else had seen them all over the world anyway?
Yeah, and the friends of Prince Harry described the girl that took the photos and sold them as despicable, and I think it is despicable behaviour to do that. But these boys, by the way, had been on the party for at least 2 weeks prior in the Caribbean at Richard Branson's island before deciding on the wonderful idea of restaging the movie The Hangover.
Sometimes I think I'd quite like to live Prince Harry's life, actually.
It was good that he kept his pants on in the pool for quite a while. I'm sure there was quite a lot of restraint involved in that.
Yeah, look, I mean, the British public love him because he is a bad boy. And actually, that's normally the second son's job in the royal family, is to be the baddie. Yeah.
Yes, and I think there was almost, it's close to the anniversary, distressingly taking you back to that image of Sarah Ferguson. Remember the toe-sucking Texan billionaire? It was about the same time as that happened. It's happened for years, hasn't it? They will always be targeted.
Yeah, well, Charles and Camilla and their conversations on the phone, which we won't go into.
Yeah.
And does it do any harm to his image? No. So it does come down to that issue of, does Buckingham Palace have any right to tell anyone what photos they can and can't publish? And the bottom line is no, they don't really. But the Sun's going to do what they want to do. Do the Sun any favors for printing this? I don't know. If sales improved, I doubt it, because everyone had already seen the photos.
It's interesting too, because the Sun, in a stroke of genius, got around it on the first day by getting 2 interns to pose naked in the same way that Prince Harry had done. They're just such a fantastic newspaper on that basis, aren't they? You wouldn't do that here, probably.
No, I was talking to one of your interns outside who said there is no way I'd be doing that, and I think that's fair enough too. But the sacrifices some youngsters make to get into journalism.
Yes, well, we might have done it in the early days of Nightline.
That's true. Nightline would have absolutely gone with this lead story, I'm sure. Now, let's talk about journalism. Journalism.co.nz.org. Tell me about this website.
Well, this is Bernard Hickey, who's with interest.co.nz, is very passionate about the lack of public interest journalism that's going on in New Zealand. And this is something that's happening around the world. So he set up this website, and it's a crowdfunding website where people can register and pay money, and journalists will go about doing work of doing public interest journalism. This has been tried in markets in other places. There's a big website based in San Francisco called Spot Me that's been doing this for a few years. It's kind of a new approach, and it has been marginally successful. It's just really hard to get critical mass, to get the kind of numbers, to get the kind of money you need to do the kind of journalism they're talking about doing. And with Spot Me in the United States, one of the things they do is they put up a story idea and then people can sort of bid on it. So in a way, it's the same issue that you have. What obligation or what input does the person who's paying for a program have in what gets reported?
That's where it perhaps potentially gets a little fraught, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. By the way, I'm a little cynical here, or if I'm going to be a cynic.
Shock horror.
I know.
There's a surprise.
I think Bernard was instrumental in setting up and running interest.co.nz, but could never achieve any equity stake in it. And I think the move to set up journalism.org is as much about him getting his own territory for the first time. If you're going to do public interest journalism, I think that's fantastic, but I'd really like to see it in the mainstream media.
Well, exactly. I hate the idea that we're going to give away the responsibility of so-called mainstream media to do this kind of journalism. I've always said good television, good radio, good newspapers about good stories well told. And sometimes those stories are public interest stories. I think I would hate to think that because there's going to be something like this out there that everyone else thinks, oh, well, they're doing it, we don't need to do it.
But at the same time, many of us are all running around covering stories about Princess Harry's bare bottom. So, maybe there is this absolute market for it.
That's true, but the public interest material, it really requires long-term investigative skills and the ability of an employer to let a reporter run for a long time.
Well, the skills are there. It's the money, though, isn't it? We see this across all media, don't we?
Well, this, again, it takes effort, it takes time, and it takes a commitment from editors to say, yes, you can have a little bit of extra time to do that. And if this is able to work, great, but I hope that it doesn't mean that everybody else thinks it's covered, we don't need to do it.
OK, now speaking about what costs a lot of money, the Olympics, according to Sky, they've talked about their results, and certainly the Games wasn't an earner for them hosting the Olympics, was it?
Their profit growth really, I think it was 2 to 3%, and that's regarded as relatively poor. There is no doubt, and John Follett suggested maybe they're not even going to bother to cover Rio next time round. Well, or maybe they'll go into a deal with Foxtel to try and get the costs down. He said it was a mistake to be running 8, I think most of them, high-definition channels.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure anybody watched the air rifling and some of those other things, but I don't think it was a mistake. I thought their coverage, it was fantastic. It was the first time in a long time that I felt good about paying my subscription fees to Sky. And I think the thing is, it's short-term thinking again, instead of long-term thinking. Everybody's thinking about the bottom line today, tomorrow, instead of thinking long-range. And the same with public interest journalism. Okay, you have short pain because you have a reporter who's not in the pool because they're spending time, but long-term it's got to be good for your brand. And to throw your toys out of the cot because you didn't do well in a deal that you did in 2007, I think it's sour grapes. I think it's positioning for the negotiations for Rio.
I think that's the most a very accurate point that he's trying to put on a hard face. He's one of the best negotiators in the business, John Follett. He also has gorse in his pocket. He's as tight as with his money. And I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of posturing here going on in the run-up to the next game. But he's also talking about not sending commentators over, for example.
Well, look, Murdoch did the same thing, News Limited, with rugby, with the World Cup, saying, we don't like the deal, we're just not going to send our reporters over. And they still managed to cover the Rugby World Cup. They didn't boycott it in the way they claimed they were going to. So, I find that very rich.
Do you think TVNZ will enter the frame again next time, or will they say, look, we're out of this race, it's just simply too expensive these days?
It depends what digital vehicles they've got. Maybe using a glue and some extra channels generated on Freeview. That multi-streaming of coverage is just revolutionised it for me to be able to go across 8 different channels and knowing I could go back to Prime in the evening and look at the wrap-up.
Well, Susan, that's the issue though, isn't it? Because now the expectation is that you're going to get 8 channels.
That's right, and they've got 4 years to figure out how to monetize it, how to make money from it. If you can't figure that out in 4 years, you've got all this time. you're just going to have to not look at traditional models. You're going to have to come up with something innovative and different. And again, it comes back to funding of all journalism. We can't keep doing what we have been doing. We have to think of new models and new ways of doing this. They've got 4 years to think about it. Surely they can do that.
Okay, let's talk about the ACC this week and what the Privacy Commissioner ruled. What did you make of that?
Well, I sort of drew a line under it. Those two reports came out were a vindication, of Bronwyn Puller's stand in all of this. It was also a vindication of the approach taken by the Dominion Post. And it was in many ways showed that the New Zealand Herald, which continued to run a kind of spoiling campaign, was probably in the wrong in the way they did it. And although they did bring out the name of Bronwyn Puller, which brought down Nick Smith and a whole pile of other people with it. But I just thought it was a neat line going under that whole saga, except for one more report out there into who did the leak from ACC, and that the officials say will take as long as it takes, and it sounds like they're not going to let it go.
Yeah, and again, I think it's been very difficult to see really good, comprehensive coverage explaining all the intricacies of this, because it seems like so many different media organizations as well. It's not that they have an agenda, but they're certainly taking a particular stance, and that's unfortunate. I wish someone would wrap it all up.
All right, Susan Baldacci and Bill Ralston, thank you this morning.